I woke up that morning thinking it would be like any other day. The house was quiet, but that wasn't unusual. I walked toward the kids' room to wake them up for school. That's when I noticed their door was open. The beds were empty. Their backpacks were gone. Their shoes were missing from the hallway. My heart started racing, and I called out their names, thinking maybe they were downstairs with their father. No answer came back. I walked into the kitchen, still trying to stay calm. That's when I saw it. A folded piece of paper sitting on the counter, right next to the coffee maker. I knew it was from my husband before I even picked it up. My hands were shaking as I opened it. The note was short. Just one sentence. He said he had taken the children and was doing what was best. Nothing else. No apology. No explanation. No plan for when I would see them again. In that moment, everything I believed about my marriage collapsed. 12 years of trust felt like a lie. I stood there reading that same sentence over and over, hoping I had misunderstood it. But the silence in the house confirmed it. My children were gone, and my husband had chosen to leave me behind. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Claire Whitmore. I'm a stay-at-home mother from Ohio. For over a decade, my life revolved around my family. I believed in my husband, Daniel Whitmore, completely. I trusted him with our home, our future, and our children. I never imagined he could disappear like this, taking the most important parts of my life with him. That morning, I walked through the house slowly, as if the walls themselves might explain what had happened. The kids' drawings were still on the fridge. Their cereal bowls were still in the sink from the night before. Everything looked normal, yet nothing was. The quiet felt heavy, almost painful. I kept asking myself what I had done wrong. I replayed every recent conversation in my head, searching for a warning sign I might have missed. There was none that made sense. Just the note. Just that one sentence telling me my role as a mother had been taken away without my consent. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, holding that paper like it was the only proof my life hadn't been a dream. I felt shock, fear, and a deep sadness all at once. I didn't know where my children were, or when I would see them again. All I knew was that my husband had made a decision that would change my life forever. Looking back, I can see how the control didn't happen all at once. It was slow and quiet, hidden behind words that sounded caring. At the beginning of our marriage, Daniel encouraged me to work. I had a steady job and felt proud contributing to our household. But after our first child was born, he started saying it made more sense for me to stay home. He said childcare was expensive and that I was better with the kids than anyone else. I believed him because I trusted his judgment. Over time, money became something I didn't question anymore. Daniel handled the bills, the savings, and the investments. He said it stressed him out when I asked too many questions, so I stopped asking. He would tell me not to worry, that he had everything under control. If I needed something, I just had to tell him. At first, that felt like security. Later, it felt like permission. Friends and family often praised him. They said I was lucky to have a husband who worked so hard and provided so well. At gatherings, Daniel was charming and confident. He talked about plans and future goals in a way that made everyone believe he was dependable. I smiled along, even when something inside me felt unsure. I didn't want to seem ungrateful. There were moments that should have made me pause. Daniel began traveling more for work, sometimes with very little notice. He would pack quickly and leave early in the morning. When I asked questions, he said his job demanded flexibility. I accepted that answer because I didn't want to appear distrustful. Trust was something I valued deeply, and I didn't want to believe my own husband deserved doubt. Paperwork started appearing on the kitchen table from time to time. Daniel would say it was for taxes or routine updates. He always seemed in a hurry when asking me to sign. I remember asking what some of the documents were for, and he would give short explanations that sounded reasonable but vague. I felt embarrassed admitting I didn't fully understand them, so I signed where he pointed. Little by little, I became more dependent without realizing it. I didn't know how much money we had or where it was kept. I didn't have access to important accounts. Daniel said it was easier that way and that couples didn't need to share every detail. I told myself that love meant trust, and trust meant letting go of control. Now, when I think about those years, I see the pattern clearly. What I once saw as care was actually control. What I thought was protection was really preparation. I didn't know it then, but my dependence was being built carefully, step by step, while I was busy believing I was safe. The days that followed moved faster than my mind could keep up with. I was still trying to understand where my children were when a legal notice arrived. It said there was an emergency custody hearing scheduled, and my name was already listed as the problem. I felt sick reading the words. I hadn't even been given a chance to speak, yet decisions about my children were already being made. When I entered the courtroom, Daniel was already there with a confident look on his face. He wasn't alone. He had a lawyer sitting beside him, calm and prepared. I felt small standing there by myself, confused and unsteady. The judge began reading claims that didn't sound like they were about me at all. They said I was emotionally unstable and unfit to care for my own children. Hearing those words spoken out loud felt like being publicly stripped of my identity. I tried to speak, but my voice shook. I didn't have evidence ready or documents to defend myself. Everything was happening too quickly. Daniel's lawyer spoke smoothly, presenting stories that painted me as unreliable. I kept looking at Daniel, waiting for some sign of guilt or hesitation, but he avoided my eyes completely. That same day, I learned my bank accounts were frozen. I couldn't access money for groceries or legal help. It felt like the floor had disappeared beneath me. I called the bank, hoping it was a mistake, but they told me the freeze was court-approved. I realized then how trapped I really was. I found a lawyer through a referral, someone willing to listen to me without judgment. After reviewing the situation, she spoke carefully, choosing her words. She told me this didn't look sudden. She said Daniel had likely been planning this for months, gathering information, preparing claims, and setting the timing to his advantage. Hearing that confirmed a fear I didn't want to admit. This wasn't an emotional decision made in anger. It wasn't a marriage falling apart naturally. It was planned. Every move had a purpose. The custody filing, the frozen accounts, the accusations. All of it was meant to remove me from my children's lives and leave me powerless to fight back. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt exposed and humiliated. People stared as if they already believed the worst about me. I wanted to scream that none of it was true, but I didn't have the strength. I finally understood that this wasn't just about divorce or separation. Daniel wasn't just leaving me. He was trying to erase me as a mother and as a wife, and he had done it with cold precision. After the court hearing, I had no choice but to leave the house. I couldn't afford it anymore, and every room felt heavy with memories I wasn't ready to face. I started packing only what I needed for a small apartment I had managed to secure. I worked slowly, opening drawers and closets, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. It felt like I was packing up pieces of a life that no longer belonged to me. In the back of the hall closet, behind old coats and storage boxes, I found something I didn't recognize. It was a small metal box, dark and scratched, with a simple lock on it. I knew immediately it wasn't mine. Daniel must have hidden it there and forgotten about it in his rush to leave. I stood there staring at it for a moment, unsure whether to open it. Curiosity and desperation finally won. I managed to unlock the box using a key I found taped underneath it. Inside were neatly stacked documents, folders, and envelopes yellowed with age. As I flipped through them, a familiar name caught my attention. It was my father's name, Richard Hale. Seeing it stopped me cold. Daniel had always spoken about my father as if he had never mattered, calling him unimportant and insisting there was nothing of value connected to him. My father passed away years ago, and we had never been close. I was told there was nothing left behind for me, no assets or savings. I accepted that and never questioned it. Now, holding those papers in my hands, I realized that story might not have been true. The documents showed business records, ownership percentages, and legal filings I didn't fully understand yet, but I could tell they were significant. As I read more carefully, one detail became clear. The paperwork showed an investment tied directly to my name, using my maiden name. It appeared to have been set up years earlier, long before my marriage. I had never been told about it, and I had never seen any returns from it. The numbers on the pages made my heart pound. This wasn't something small or forgotten. It was something that had grown quietly over time. I sat on the floor surrounded by half-packed boxes, holding those papers like they were fragile. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something other than fear. I felt confusion mixed with a spark of clarity. Daniel hadn't mentioned this because he hadn't known what it truly was, or maybe he had dismissed it too easily. I carefully placed the documents back into the box and packed it separately. I didn't know exactly what they meant yet, but I knew one thing for sure. What I had just found could change everything I thought I knew about my past, and possibly my future. I spent the next few days carefully going through the documents I had found in that old box. I had to understand what I was looking at before I could make any decisions. I reached out to a lawyer who specialized in trusts and estates. When she examined the papers, her eyes widened slightly. That's when I realized just how serious this was. She explained to me that my father, Richard Hale, had quietly built investments over decades, stakes in land, energy companies, and several patents that were now extremely valuable. None of it had been part of my marriage because it was all in a trust set up under my maiden name. The trust was designed so that spouses couldn't claim any part of it unless it was explicitly disclosed. In other words, Daniel had no legal access to this fortune, and he had never known it existed. As I processed this, a mix of emotions hit me. Anger, disbelief, and something I hadn't felt in months, control. The same man who had taken my children and tried to erase me had unknowingly underestimated me completely. I didn't need to confront him yet. I didn't need to gloat. I simply had power now that he had no idea about, and it was legal, untouchable, and mine. I also learned that the value of the assets was immense, far beyond anything I could have imagined when I first opened that dusty box. It wasn't just money. It was a way to protect my children, to rebuild my life, and to step into a position where I no longer had to fear Daniel or anyone else trying to control me. For years, I had thought my financial dependence had trapped me. Now, in a matter of days, the entire balance had shifted. I stayed silent. I didn't tell anyone yet, not my lawyer, not friends, not even my parents. I needed time to think, to plan. Reacting too quickly could ruin everything I was about to gain. Daniel was still unaware. He thought he had won, thought he had taken everything from me. That ignorance became my advantage. I could rebuild without interference, quietly, deliberately, and carefully. For the first time since that morning when the note hit me like a hammer, I felt a spark of hope. It wasn't just hope, it was clarity. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't alone. My father's foresight had created a safety net I had never known about, and it was strong enough to protect not only me but my children. I could feel the tides turning. Daniel's control was an illusion, and I now held the real power. The truth about the billions was my shield, and I planned to use it wisely, without revealing my hand too soon. The realization was simple yet life-changing. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was about to reclaim everything that had been taken from me, and more. After discovering the trust, I realized I had to be careful. Daniel still thought he was in control, and I couldn't risk him knowing I had resources. I decided to play the part he expected, a struggling, broken mother trying to survive without him. I kept my apartment modest, limited my spending, and let him believe that freezing my accounts and taking the kids had left me powerless. Every word I spoke to him and every interaction was calculated. He needed to feel victorious. Meanwhile, I quietly assembled a team I could trust. I hired a top legal team with experience in complex family cases and financial disputes. Alongside them, I brought in forensic accountants to dig through every document Daniel had ever signed. I didn't want assumptions, I wanted facts. My goal was simple: expose the truth without tipping my hand too soon. As they worked, pieces of the puzzle began to surface. Daniel had falsified documents in multiple places. There were forged signatures on contracts and bank forms. He had manipulated paperwork to make it appear that he was the sole decision-maker for our children and finances. The more we discovered, the clearer it became. Daniel had assumed I was completely dependent and broke, and he acted on that assumption. That was the real reason he had taken the kids. He thought I couldn't fight back, that I had no resources or power to challenge him. I stayed calm and quiet through the process, letting my team work without interference. I had to maintain the image of weakness, so no one, including Daniel, suspected the storm that was quietly building. At home, I kept my life simple, played the struggling mother, and never let slip even the smallest hint of what I had discovered. Every call I made to my lawyer was private, every meeting behind closed doors. Piece by piece, the evidence grew. Bank records, legal filings, and past contracts all pointed to the same conclusion. Daniel's actions weren't impulsive or desperate. They were planned, and they were based on lies. The children had been taken not because I was unfit, but because he believed he could control the outcome. He underestimated me completely, and that miscalculation would become his downfall. By the time we were ready to act, I had all I needed. Facts, evidence, and witnesses were aligned. I had maintained the illusion of struggle while quietly building the power and knowledge to turn the situation around. Daniel believed he had won, but in reality, I had been preparing to reclaim everything he thought he had stolen from me. And the best part, he had no idea what was coming. The game had shifted, and I held all the cards. The day of the hearing arrived, and I felt a mix of nerves and calm. I had spent weeks preparing with my lawyers, reviewing every detail, making sure nothing was left to chance. As we walked into the courtroom, Daniel sat across from me, looking confident as always. He thought he had already won, and that confidence made it easier for me to stay composed. When the judge called the case, I listened carefully to Daniel's claims. He repeated the same accusations of instability and unfitness that had shocked me months ago. But this time I didn't panic. I knew the truth was on my side, and I had the evidence to prove it. My lawyer began presenting the documents we had gathered. Proof of his forged signatures, manipulated financial statements, and the real reasons he had taken the children. Each piece of evidence was laid out clearly, calmly, and without exaggeration. As the papers were shown, Daniel's confident expression started to fade. He tried to interrupt, but the judge firmly told him to wait. My lawyer explained how he had assumed I was powerless and how he had manipulated the courts and finances to his advantage. The courtroom felt heavy with tension. Every word, every document, chipped away at the story he had built around me. I watched silently, feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and relief. I didn't need to say a word. The facts were enough. The judge asked pointed questions, and the truth became undeniable. Daniel's emergency custody claim was dismissed, and custody was returned to me. The judge also ordered an investigation into his business accounts, noting discrepancies and potential fraud. I could see the shift in the room. The tone of authority, once neutral, now leaned toward fairness and accountability. The same man who had looked untouchable now seemed small, forced to face the consequences of his actions. I didn't celebrate or gloat. I stayed calm, keeping my eyes on my children's safety and my future. The court had recognized the truth and justice had been done, but I wanted nothing more than to rebuild quietly. I watched Daniel, and for the first time, I saw genuine shock and fear in his eyes. He realized he had underestimated me completely. The woman he thought was powerless had outmaneuvered him legally and strategically, and there was nothing he could do about it. Walking out of the courtroom that day, I felt a sense of control I hadn't felt in months. The reversal wasn't just legal, it was personal. I had reclaimed what he had tried to take, but I had done it with dignity and patience. Daniel had learned a harsh lesson, and I had gained something far more valuable than money or revenge: respect, freedom, and the knowledge that I was stronger than anyone had believed. After the courtroom victory, I had a choice. I could have gone after Daniel's money, made a scene, or tried to ruin him publicly. But I realized the most powerful revenge wasn't about wealth. It was about credibility. He had built his life on the image of being successful, trustworthy, and in control. That image was fragile, and I knew exactly how to dismantle it. I didn't rush or act impulsively. I let my legal team handle everything carefully. They reached out to Daniel's business partners and shared the findings from our investigation: his falsified documents, forged signatures, and the manipulations he had used to try to control me. Each revelation was presented factually, without exaggeration, so it couldn't be ignored. The effect was immediate. His partners, many of whom had trusted him for years, began distancing themselves. Deals were canceled, contracts were reviewed, and the reputation he had built so carefully started to crumble. Meanwhile, I focused on my children. Full custody had been granted, but I wanted to ensure that Daniel's access was limited and safe. Court orders were clear. Any time with the children would be supervised. I didn't want revenge to turn into chaos. I wanted it to be controlled and complete. Watching him realize he could no longer manipulate or intimidate us was satisfying in a quiet, almost calm way. There was no shouting, no public confrontation, just the slow collapse of the power he had believed he held. The most striking part of this revenge was how invisible it was. I didn't post online, I didn't tell friends to spread rumors, and I didn't humiliate him publicly. Instead, I let facts, evidence, and the truth work silently. Each phone call, each canceled deal, each withdrawal of support from his associates chipped away at the man who had tried to destroy my life. The revenge was steady, legal, and devastating, and Daniel had no clue it was coming until it was too late. I spent time with my children, helping them feel safe and secure after months of uncertainty. I rebuilt our home, our routine, and our sense of normalcy. The contrast between our stability and his crumbling world was stark. He had assumed power came from fear and control, but I had learned that real power comes from knowledge, patience, and strategy. In the end, I didn't need to yell or fight to win. The quiet, deliberate steps I took ensured that justice wasn't just served, it was inevitable. Daniel lost the one thing he valued most, his reputation. And I gained far more than money or temporary satisfaction. I gained freedom, peace, and the certainty that I could protect my family and myself, no matter what he thought he could do. With Daniel finally out of control and our lives settled, I focused on creating a stable and peaceful home for my children. We moved into a modest house with a small yard where they could play safely and feel secure. I wanted our home to be a place of comfort, not fear or tension, and slowly, we began to settle into a new routine. The laughter of my children became the first sign that life could feel normal again. I also wanted to honor my father's legacy quietly. Using the resources I had discovered, I set up education programs and scholarships in his name, helping students who were overlooked or struggling. I never made a public announcement. It wasn't about recognition. It was about doing something meaningful and continuing the values my father had built through his work. It gave me a sense of purpose and reminded me that some victories aren't about revenge. They're about building something positive from hardship. At the same time, I focused on teaching my children lessons that mattered. I didn't dwell on bitterness or make them resent their father. Instead, I talked to them about strength, resilience, and honesty. I wanted them to grow knowing that setbacks don't define you, and that even when life seems unfair, you can find a way to move forward with dignity. Seeing them learn and apply these lessons was more powerful than any courtroom victory or financial win. Daniel gradually faded into the background. His absence was noticeable not only because of the court orders limiting his access, but because he had lost the support of people around him. He was a man undone by his own greed, unable to rebuild the reputation he had once taken pride in. I didn't need to chase him or humiliate him further. His actions had already set the course for his own downfall, and it was enough to see him struggle while we thrived. Life became simpler and more fulfilling. I could make decisions without fear, plan for the future without restriction, and focus on the well-being of my children. Each day, I felt more confident and in control. The mistakes and betrayals of the past no longer dictated our lives. Instead, they became lessons that shaped how I approached every choice moving forward. In time, the peace in our home became a reflection of the life I had rebuilt. I had regained independence, power, and clarity. My children had stability, safety, and guidance. And though Daniel was still out there somewhere, his shadow no longer loomed over us. We were free, living fully on our own terms, quietly strong, and finally at peace. Looking back on everything, I realized the depth of the betrayal I had endured. Daniel had thought that taking money, controlling accounts, and removing my children would make him powerful. He believed that fear and pressure could dictate the outcome of my life. But he never understood one simple truth. Patience and strategy could be far stronger than intimidation. Losing my children, even temporarily, nearly broke me. The thought of not being able to hold them, guide them, and protect them was unbearable. For days, I felt helpless, confused, and betrayed in ways I didn't know were possible. I questioned myself constantly, wondering if I could ever rebuild the life that had been taken from me. But amid that pain, a spark of determination grew. I refused to let despair define me. Finding the truth about my father's trust and the resources he had left gave me hope. But it wasn't just the money that mattered. It was the clarity and power it brought, an ability to act, to plan, and to reclaim control over my own life and my children's safety. I learned to move quietly, strategically, and deliberately. I realized that surviving the storm without losing myself was the first real victory. Through all of it, I chose silence over confrontation. I didn't lash out or shout. I didn't let anger dictate my actions. Instead, I let facts, patience, and careful planning guide me. Daniel underestimated me completely, believing I was powerless, but it was that underestimation that gave me the advantage. Every step I took was calculated to protect my family and restore our lives. I discovered that dignity was stronger than vengeance and composure more powerful than aggression. When I finally had full custody, stability, and control, I understood what true victory meant. I didn't need to prove anything by taking his money or publicly humiliating him. My children were safe. Our home was peaceful. Our lives were intact. Daniel's mistakes and greed had undone him, and I didn't have to do a thing to make that happen. My survival, patience, and quiet determination had done all the work. The lesson Daniel never expected was simple. Real power doesn't come from money or control over others. It comes from resilience, intelligence, and the ability to endure hardship without losing your dignity. Losing nearly everything taught me what mattered most, and rebuilding quietly reminded me of my own strength. I didn't win because I was richer. I won because I survived, stayed silent, and chose to rise above destruction. Now, as I look at my children playing safely and happily, I know that betrayal cannot define a person. It can hurt, it can challenge, but it can also teach and strengthen. And in that lesson lies the true victory, one Daniel never saw coming.